Wonderful song tonight, and I think you were singing out tonight. That's great. Romans chapter 13 is where we're going to be this evening. Romans 13. We should have a PowerPoint ready for this evening. And let me get a swig. Boy, I was thirsty. All right, on Wednesday nights we've been dealing with different doctrines, going through the articles of faith that our church made up many years ago. And so we're going through those and see what we believe. And of course, I'll state this as I have stated many times before, in no way is this exhaustive to go through every little thing about each of these, but this will give us a summary of those beliefs. So tonight is the doctrine of civil government, and I think this is very appropriate as we're heading into election time. And the top of your page, as well as on the screen, should be the articles of faith dealing with the doctrine of government. And it says that civil government is of divine appointment for the interest and good order of human society, and that magistrates are to be prayed for, conscientiously honored, and obeyed, except in things opposed to the will of our Lord Jesus Christ, who is the only Lord of the conscience and the Prince of the kings of the earth. So I'm not even going tonight to deal with that one phrase that it says, except in things opposed to the will of our Lord Jesus Christ. On rare occasions, there might be a situation where we are faced with a situation where the government is telling us to do something that is anti-biblical. It's against our faith. In that event, we ought to obey God rather than man. I'm not even going to get into those rare cases of such things like that. I am going to focus in on the rest of this, of these points, and we're really going to go through the whole chapter of Romans 13. Typically, the first 7 verses are read when it deals with government. In fact, I will be bringing a message very similar to this, I think, the second Sunday in January. The second Sunday in January, on January the 9th, is LEAD, Law Enforcement Appreciation Day. It's a national holiday, and the last couple of years, we've done something for our police officers, and including a couple years ago, pre-COVID, we had a meal for them and passed out New Testaments to them and things like that, as well as gift cards. Last year, we took something to them. This next year, we'll do something as well. But I think it's important for us, particularly in our society today that's anti-police officer, defunding the police and such, that we recognize and hold these people, men and women, in high regard because it's in the Bible. So we're going to take a look at that this evening. Before we read the book of Romans, or this chapter, and get into the outline, let me just remind you who was writing this and when. The Apostle Paul was writing this to the people at Rome. At that time, they had as their emperor a guy by the name of Nero, who not only disliked the Christians, but in many historical accounts, he burned down parts of the city and then accused, because he wanted a renovation program, and then accused the Christians. And the backlash came against the Christians, and many of them were burned and martyred because of that. He, as well as other emperors before and after, persecuted the Christians. So they had it very difficult. In that time frame is Paul writing this, because the churches not only had Jews, but also Gentiles there, and the Jews had a problem with submitting to Roman authority after all the harshness that they've given to them. So Paul is discussing what to do biblically when you don't agree with the government. All right? So I'm going to try my best to stay on point tonight because there's so much that could be said about our government. Number one, the government's conception. The government's conception. And letter A underneath that is its power. Its power. The government's conception and its power. Look with me at Romans chapter 13, verses 1 and 2. Let every soul be subject unto the higher powers, for there is no power but of God. The powers that be are ordained of God. Whosoever therefore resisteth the power resisteth the ordinance of God, and they that resist shall receive to themselves damnation. Now, before I begin, I want to clear something up that's not even in the notes. Sometimes in the Bible, the word damnation means damnation in the lake of fire. However, it doesn't always mean damnation. This passage, when it's talking about damnation, it doesn't mean if I disobey a police officer, I'm going to hell. No, it means you're going to suffer the consequences. In the passage in 1 Corinthians chapter 11, when it's talking about taking the Lord's Supper, and it says, whoso, and I'm paraphrasing, whoso eateth this bread and drinketh this cup unworthily shall be, I forget the last words, guilty of, anyway, it says you'll suffer damnation. And it uses that word. And it doesn't mean I'm going to hell if I take communion. No, again, you're going to suffer consequences of it. So keep that in mind as we're dealing with this. So we want to define the word power. You can clearly see the word power or powers were mentioned several times in the first two verses there. The word power means authority. It means the right to do something. So the power is the authority, and that authority has the right to do what they are doing. And in this verse, it clearly states that that power is of God. Now, in the book of Genesis, I'll just turn there for time's sake, but in the book of Genesis, this is the forming of the government. God instituted three things. One was the home. That was the very first thing. The second one was government, and the third is the church. In Genesis chapter 9, verse number 6, it's dealing with capital punishment, but he's really dealing with who has the authority to carry that out. Exodus chapter, I said Genesis, I'm in Exodus. Genesis chapter 9, verse number 6, whoso sheddeth man's blood, by man shall his blood be shed. For in the image of God made he man. So it's dealing with capital punishment, but it's talking about the person in charge of capital punishment or carrying that out is the government. And so it's clear that God instituted the government, not only way back in Genesis chapter 9, but in the New Testament, Romans chapter 13, that power is of God. To resist the government is to resist God. Since God instituted the power for society, and we'll go through this passage and it'll clearly tell us what the purpose of the government is. But if God instituted that authority, then we're to be subject unto that authority, and being subject to that authority is really directly and indirectly being subject to God. Much like a parent is placed by God over the children. So when a child chooses to disobey their parents, they are disobeying God as well, because that is the God-given power over them. Police officers or civil authority, judges, whatever, are placed in the position of government or power for that very purpose. So we see its power, and then we want to see, letter B, its purpose. Its purpose. Much like a lot of unions Unions, I believe, started out with a good intent, but it has gone far, many of unions have gone far from what the original intention was. Government, in my opinion, has done the same. In this passage, there are some other passages that we can find the more purposes of the government, but in this passage, there's two clearly that are given. First of all, by keeping the nation safe. By keeping the nation safe. Look with me at verse number 3. For rulers are not a terror to good works. So in other words, I don't need to be scared every time I see a police officer. If I'm doing good, why be scared of them? Oh, why? Just too right. You know, they're not a terror for those that do good. But to the evil. Wilt thou then not be afraid of the power? Do that which is good, and thou shalt have praise of the same. For he is the minister of God. It's going to use that phrase 3 times in this passage, that police officers are ministers of God. And it's to thee for good. But if thou do that which is evil, be afraid. For he beareth not the sword. That was their vernacular in that day. That was because that was their weapon. We would say gun today. For he beareth not the gun in vain. For he is the minister of God, a revenger to execute wrath upon him that doeth evil. And again, I don't want to get sidetracked, but I know today policemen are always being videotaped and they're under scrutiny, and it seems like we've tied their hands, all because of a few that have done wrong or extended their power beyond what it should. Therefore, all of them are tied, in my opinion. And I think it's a shame because it's very clear that their job is to execute wrath upon those that do evil. That may sound harsh, but it's for our good. So fill this in. Government protects the community by punishing the criminal. You should have 2 blanks there. Government protects the community by punishing the criminal. By keeping the criminal out of society, we are safe. When rulers execute wrath, it is not only a punishment, but it is also a deterrent. In Ecclesiastes, Solomon writes this: because sentence against an evil work is not executed speedily, therefore the heart of the sons of men are fully set in them to do evil. So in other words, because of, again, the way that our society works, sometimes somebody is caught doing a crime, they are in the system for a long time, and because punishment isn't met out rapidly or speedily, everybody else in society thinks, I shouldn't say everybody, but those who are criminals and that want to commit it, that maybe I can get away with it, and if I do, it's not a big deal because there was no punishment for the first 100 guys that did this. You know what I mean? So it's very clear that execution of wrath should be done speedily in order to be used as a deterrent. But one of its purpose is keeping the nation safe, and secondly, by keeping the nation solvent. Solvent. Now, I don't like to pay taxes. I don't. Whenever I can, I go over to Iowa to get gas. Why? It's not because they have better gas. It's because we have taxes here in the wonderful state of Illinois. And I'm not against Illinois. I'm not against the government or anything like that. I just choose to save money, whenever I can. Now, I don't like paying property tax. I just got notification that our property tax went up. Praise the Lord. And I don't like doing that. However, why do we pay taxes? It goes for a reason. It's for a cause. Now, even in Jesus' day, there were people who took money and abused the money. They were called publicans. I don't for one second think that every bit of our dime that goes to our government is well spent. There's a lot of waste out there. I believe the majority of our taxes is wasted. I think they should appoint some citizens over the budget, not some politicians over the budget, and we'll see some things change. But anyway, look with me at verse number 6. It talks about taxing. For this cause pay ye tribute also, for they are God's ministers. Third time, police officers are God's ministers, attending continually upon this very thing. So part of our taxes goes towards our society in protecting us. And so not just for the police officers, but for other things as well, obviously. But one of the reasons is for solvency. So safety and solvency. So that's number one, the government's conception. And we looked at the power, we looked at its purpose. Let's go on to Roman numeral 2, the citizens' cooperation. The citizens' cooperation. So out of the first couple of verses, it talks about the responsibility of the government. Now it's going to switch gears and say, okay, that's their government, that's their responsibility. What's our responsibility in the government? And again, we could find other verses that talk about things, but we're going to stick to this passage tonight. Letter A command to be obeyed. A command to be obeyed. Here's the second time in this passage it's going to be using the word subject. The word subject means that I have a willful choice to subject myself or to place myself under the God-given authority. So look with me at verse number 5. Wherefore ye must needs be subject. Now stop there. It doesn't say, if you want to. If you think about if it's convenient for you, if you're having a good day, if you agree with the government's rule, it doesn't say that. It says you must needs. So again, let us rethink the way we drive, the way we stop, the way that we pay our taxes, because it says you must needs do this. It's a command. Now, let me say clearly that in this passage, it says back in verse number 3 that we are to do good works. Later on in verse 3, it says we are to do that which is good. And so Christians are commanded to do these things in society. Can you imagine what our society would be like if everyone just chose to do the right thing? At a four-way stop. No, you go first. You had the right way. I know I had the right way, but please, I want to be, go ahead, please go ahead. And do things like that, and just kindness, and I don't want to trespass or walk across your lawn. I know you took time to mow that. No, I won't do that. I'll take my time and go around. And kindness. But boy, we have choices, and people aren't kind oftentimes. We know, even in Florida, even though there was a threat after they had massive flooding not to do looting, even though they threatened them with these severe sentences, guess what people did? They seized the opportunity to loot. Why? Because of unkindness, because of selfishness and greed. In this verse, it tells us two reasons to obey the law. One is a reason externally, and one is a reason internally. It first of all tells us the external reason, because it says in verse 5, not only for wrath. So the very first reason is because of consequences. If you're not going to do good, you choose to speed, you choose to steal, you choose to do whatever, you choose to break the law, then you have consequences. That's called wrath. The police officers are going to come down onto you and going to give you a ticket, going to punish you, and who are you to blame them? You're the one that's chosen to do what's wrong. So when we choose to do wrong and we get punished for it, who's to blame? We are, because we chose that. It was our choice, even though it says ye must needs be subject. And when we're not subject, we suffer the wrath. There's consequences. That's externally. By the way, recently someone said that they started slowing down when they drive because they got a ticket twice for speeding. And I sent them this text. Mistakes are meant for learning, not repeating. That's true. That's true in a lot of areas, isn't it? That's true. But then it tells us a second reason to obey the law, not only for wrath or conscience or consequences, but the second one is for conscience sake. For conscience sake. It's amazing how many people don't have a conscience. They see the speed limit, they don't care. They see something else, they don't care. They're only thinking about themselves. You look at Black Friday news, and everybody's out for themselves. Where's the conscience nowadays? It's seared. Just people are just warped mentally, and that's sad. But we ought to do what's right, even if there's no consequence, even if we can get away with it. But do it because it's the right thing to do. Obey the law. And because God is watching us. He's the ultimate authority. Whether there's going to be consequences or wrath or not, we ought to do it for conscience sake. All right, letter A was a command to be obeyed. Letter B, a course to be followed. A course to be followed. Well, let's first of all look at number one, monetary support. Monetary support. Now, it already kind of mentioned in verse number 6 that we ought to pay tribute, but now it's going to be using some other words. Look at verse 7. Render therefore to all their dues. Tribute to whom tribute is due, custom to whom custom, fear to whom fear, honor to whom honor. Well, even though these terms are used somewhat synonymously, they're not quite the same. Today, if I went into Walmart, I went to Farm and Fleet today to get a key made. I paid whatever it was, $2 and something cents to get a key that didn't work. But anyway, praise the Lord for receipts. But anyway, I went in and got a key made. Do you believe something? There's taxes on things you purchase. Can you believe that? There's taxes. They charged me, what kind of tax? Sales tax. They didn't charge me property tax. So there's different kind of taxes. The same is true with the Roman government. So the word tribute, I don't know what you want to fill in here, but it's an annual tax levied similar to our property tax. So pay your property taxes. Custom is a tax on goods, similar to sales tax. And so not only monetary support, but moral support. That's number 2, moral support. So just like I am to render, therefore, to all their dues, I'm also to give fear to whom fear, and honor to whom honor. The word fear and the word honor means respect and regard. That's what it means, respect and regard. Why? Because that is the power, the position that God has placed that person over that particular job to help me. So I am to regard them. Now look, and I'll just be blunt, I'm not going to get sidetracked. If Mr. Biden came in that door, even though I did not vote for him, nor will I ever, but I will respect that man if he came in that door because of his office. I pray for that man, as we ought to. Whether I agree with him on anything or not. But nevertheless, I am to give respect and regard. So, and keep in mind the time of this period where Paul was writing these people about respect to authority. So thirdly is the Christian's caution. So we looked at the government's conception, the citizen's cooperation. Thirdly tonight, the Christian's caution. So we've already gone through the first 7 verses, which is typically the passage that deals with government. However, in reading the whole thing in context, certainly the last several verses are in context of all of it. So how can I best fulfill this practice of higher powers and being a good citizen and God's ministers, all of that stuff? Letter A in your notes there, Christians should fulfill this law with love. Look with me at verse 8. I want you to imagine a utopia, as I said, that if everyone, every citizen, just chose to love. Look at verse 8. Owe no man anything but to love one another, for he that loveth another hath fulfilled the law. And now he's going to mention some of the Old Testament law commands. For this, thou shalt not commit adultery, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not bear false witness, thou shalt not covet. And if there be any other commandment, it is briefly comprehended in this saying. In other words, when he's saying it's briefly comprehended, he's saying, let me summarize all of the commandments. Namely, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. Can you imagine Casey Disterhoff, the sheriff, the chief of police here, can you imagine his job if every citizen in Geneseo chose just to love? Imagine how easier their job would be if a citizen said, I choose to love them. I choose to think of them instead of me. I choose to love God. Can you imagine that type of society where Paul is writing this in this venomous society atmosphere of Nero? He's writing this and says, love, 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 love. And he says that's the way society should work, particularly as a Christian. Fill this in. There would be less breaking the law if there was more showing of love. I saw a video recently on YouTube how a guy just bought, a young man, you probably would have figured it out once I tell you this, buys a brand new sports car, gets behind the wheel, pulls out on the road, and guns it. And you can hear them with the windows down, yeah! And they did not think that somebody's going to pull in front of them, and 15 seconds after owning a brand new sports car, they wrecked it. Now, the video did not tell me who was in the other car, if they were hurt, if they had insurance, what kind of problems they would have suffered. But that guy he wasn't loving his neighbor. He was only thinking about himself. Yeah, the thrill. You see what I mean? So a Christian should fulfill the law with love. And then, letter B, Christians should fulfill this law with light. With light. In this passage, as he's closing off this chapter, not that Paul had chapters and verses, but this thought that the chapters and verses are summarizing it together, he's saying, look, society is pretty dark because people choose not to love. He's saying every citizen, particularly Christians, have a choice, darkness or light, or good and evil. So that's what he's telling us. He's going to give us 3 messages. First of all, wake up. Wake up. Now, if you don't get anything out of this, get this point right here. Because even though let's just choose speeding. If I choose to speed, like I did today accidentally, driving someone else's truck, it was truly an accident. I really didn't know the speed limit at the time. Carl can vouch for me. I'm confessing my sins in church. God knows my heart. But it was truly an accident. But I was speeding with someone else's car. But anyway, I would have left it in the glove box for them, I'm sure, the ticket. But anyway, if I chose to speed, and it was my fault, I got a ticket, I got caught, and whether it was by a camera or by a person, whatever, I did that. And then I got a ticket. I got so stinking mad, I yelled at the police officer. He says, "Hands behind your back." I said, "I will not do that." I got upset at him, and we wrestled, and I pulled his gun out on him and shot him, and then several more police came, and then I got in his car and took off on a police chase, and I'm on the Channel 6 News all of a sudden. And then in the meantime, 3 or 4 people are dying because that's a road rage thing type of accident, and then finally there's a police shootout, all because I got a speeding ticket in someone else's car. Well, ultimately, even though I will suffer consequences physically here on earth, I will answer to the judge. So he's going to change this approach and saying, yes, you have consequences here where you may face a judge, but keep in mind you're going to face the judge. Look at verse 11. And that knowing the time, that now it is high time to awake out of sleep, for now is our salvation nearer than when we believed. The night is far spent, the day is at hand. And so we need to realize the brevity of life and that we will face maybe not an earthly judge, but we will face the judge one day. So we need to wake up. Number 2, clean up. Clean up. In verse 12, the last part of it, let us therefore cast off the works of darkness, and let us put on the armor of light. Now today, this morning, I chose to wear grubbies because we were picking up pumpkins today, and I was doing some other things around the house. But about an hour and a half ago, my wife showed up with my church clothes. I chose to put off the grubby clothes and put on these. You choose to put off and put on things as well every day. This is a choice. I have a choice to whether I put on darkness or light. In the next verse, it's going to tell us how to walk and how not to walk. Now, when I was in college, it was hilarious because some Bible college students respected their teachers so much that they started to walk physically the way that some of them walk. There was this one guy on staff that he would always cock his Bible up like this and walk with cowboy boots like this. So guess what? Some college students walk like this. There was another staff member, he would cock his Bible halfway like this and go like this. And guess what? There were some college students, and I'm being godly. I'll tell you what, I'm just going to be just like them. And they picked up more of their habits than that. I'm just trying to make a point here. When it's telling us how to walk, it's not saying that. Not that at all. But look at verse number 13. Let us walk how? Honestly. Honestly. Again, can you imagine a society where people were just honest? And then he's going to tell us several ways not to walk. And some of these words are not words that we would use nowadays, so I'll give you a brief description of them. First of all, it says rioting. It tells us, let us walk honestly as in the day, not in rioting. Rioting means carousing. It means uncontrolled sinful behavior. Much like you would see today somebody actually rioting. That is a type of rioting because it is uncontrolled behavior. It's carousing. It's just hanging out. Not in rioting. And then second way is drunkenness. That does not need a definition. Now, then it says a word. It says not in chambering. That word chambering is only used one time in the Bible. It's here. Now, the Greek word chambering is used a couple of times, but the English way it's translated is only used once. It actually comes from an old archaic word, means chamber, and it means a private room or a bedroom. It actually means shacking up. That's what the word chambering means, shacking up. It means fornicating, loose living, adultery lifestyle. It's interesting because the words that it translates into besides this is conceive and bed. It actually means, and I'm going to be very blunt here, and I hope no one gets offended, the root word actually comes from sperm. And so the chambering it's that kind of lifestyle. It says we ought not to walk that way. And so not in chambering, and then it gives another word, wantonness. Wantonness. And that is sexually lawless or unconstrained. Now, chambering and wantonness are very similar to each other because they both deal with the flesh. There's also another Bible word that is kin to it, it's lasciviousness, and that just means uncontrolled. It means no one's governing me. And then it gives another way that we should not be walking, and that is not in strife and envying or quarreling due to jealousy. Quarreling due to jealousy. I was going to give you an illustration. Let me, just for the sake of time, I'll just give you the bullets of it. Years ago, there was a train heading down a track, and little did the train engineer, I don't know his title, is he called an engineer, the guy who runs a train? Anyway, an engineer. As he's traveling down, little did he know that the drawbridge was out. And the engineer to that had a flag to wave. A red flag means stop, caution, hey, look out. A white flag means everything's hunky-dory, you could proceed. The problem with the drawbridge engineer was they had used this red flag for years and had faded. And so the guy on the train, when he looked at that red flag that had been faded, he thought he saw white, so he buzzed on past. The train went in over the hill and the drawbridge was out. 18 people ended up dying. My illustration is sometimes our life isn't as bright as it should be. It's faded. And we don't draw people to Christ, but we draw people from Christ. So there's more to the story, but that's basically it. So let me give you the third point that he says as we close off this chapter. Wake up, clean up. Then number 3, grow up. Grow up. He says, verse 14, but put ye on the Lord Jesus Christ and make not provision for the flesh to fulfill the lusts thereof. Now, I love math, and anybody in here love math as well? All right, 4.5 of us, 5. There's a guy, is a Greek philosopher, his name is Pythagoras. He invented a mathematical term. It's called the Pythagorean theorem, and it's basically you take the sum of the squares of the legs of the right angle, and it equals the square of the hypotenuse, or better known as a squared plus b squared equals c squared. He said this about religion, and I'll close with this statement. The sum total of your religion is to become like the one you worship. If we call ourselves Christians, then we probably ought to be a better citizen, because that best displays the one who is in power. May God help us. Father, thank you so much for this chapter, this night. These people, I love church. I look forward to it every time. And we so appreciate the freedoms of this country, the people that you have placed in power over us. We respect that, and help us, oh Lord, whenever we see an officer or someone in authority doing our society good, may we buy them a cup of coffee, or at least thank them or wave to them, and be so thankful for the powers that be ordained of God. These are ministers of God, Help us, oh God, to appreciate them. I know what our media, I know what our society is saying, but Lord, help us not to go and be engulfed in a wave of deceit and hate. Lord, you speak clearly